Okay, let's get back to supply and demand. We have already known about the supply and demand. Next, let's take a closer look at law of demand and law of supply. Law of demand states that if all other factors remain equal, the higher price of a good, the less people will demand that good. In other words, the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. The amount of a good that buyers purchase at a higher price is less because as the price of a good goes up, so does the opportunity cost of buying that good. As a result, people will naturally avoid buying a product that will force them to forego the consumption of something else they value more. The chart below shows that the curve is a downward slope. A, B, and C are points on the demand curve. Each point on the curve reflects a direct correlation between quantity demanded or Q and price or P. So, at point A, the quantity demanded will be Q1 and the price will be P1 and so on. The demand relationship curve illustrates the negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. As you can see in the curve, the left side bar is the price of the product, and the lower bar is the quantity of the product. The higher the price of a good, the lower the quantity demanded, or A, and the lower the price, the more the good will be in demand, or C. It means that if the price is high, you will need less, but if the price is lower, you will need more. For the law of supply, it's like the law of demand. The law of supply demonstrates the quantities that will be sold at a certain price. But unlike the law of demand, the supply relationship shows an upward slope. This means the higher the price, the higher quantity supplied. Producers supply more at the higher price because selling a higher quantity at a higher price increases revenue. For example of this curve, the left side bar is the price bar, and the bar below is the quantity bar. A, B, and C are points on the supply curve. Each point on the curve reflects a direct correlation between quantity supplied, or Q, and price, or P. At point B, the quantity supplied will be Q2 and the price will be P2, and so on. It means that if your supply or product is in the low price, you would like to sell less, and if your product is in the higher price, you would like to sell more. Time and supply. Unlike the demand relationship, however, the supply relationship is a factor of time. Time is important to supply because suppliers must, but cannot always, react quickly to a change in demand or price. So it is important to try and determine whether a price change that is caused by demand will be temporary or permanent. Let's say there's a sudden increase in the demand and price for umbrellas in an unexpected rainy season. Suppliers may simply accommodate demand by using their production equipment more. intensively. If, however, there is a climate change and the population will need umbrellas year-round, the change in demand and price will be expected to be long-term. Suppliers will have to change their equipment and production facilities in order to meet the long-term levels of demand. For supply and demand relationship, now that we know the law of supply and demand already, let's turn to an example to show how supply and demand affect price. Let's imagine that a special edition CD of your favorite band is released for only $20. Because the record company's previous analysis showed the consumers will not demand CDs at a price higher than $20. Only 10 CDs were released because the opportunity cost is too high for suppliers to produce more. If, however, the 10 CDs are demanded by 20 people, the price will be subsequently rise because, according to the demand relationship, as demand increases, so does the price. Consequently, the rise in price should prompt more CDs to be supplied, as the supply relationship shows that the higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied. If, however, there are 30 CDs produced and demand is still at 20, the price will not be pushed up because the supply more than accommodates demand. In fact, after the 20 consumers have been satisfied with their CD purchases, the price of the leftover CDs may drop as CD producers attempted to sell the remaining 10 CDs. The lower price will then make the CD more available to people who had previously decided that the opportunity cost of buying the CD at $20 was too high. For equilibrium, when supply and demand are equal, for example, when the supply function and demand function intersect, the economy is said to be at equilibrium. At this point, the allocation of goods is at its most efficient because the amount of goods being supplied is exactly the same as the amount of goods being demanded. Thus, everyone, which are individuals, firms, or countries, is satisfied with the current economic condition. At the given price, suppliers are selling all the goods that they have produced, and consumers are getting all the goods that they are demanding. This is an example of the equilibrium price between the buyer and the sellers. As you can see on the chart, equilibrium occurs at the intersection of the demand and supply curve, which indicates no allocative inefficiency. At this point, the price of the goods will be P and the quantity will be Q. These figures are referred to as equilibrium price and quantity. In the real marketplace, equilibrium can only ever be reached in theory. So, the prices of goods and services are constantly changing in relation of fluctuations in demand and supply. And for the opposite side, what is disequilibrium? Disequilibrium occurs whenever the price or quantity is not equal to P or Q. There are two kinds of disequilibrium. The first thing is excess supply, and the second thing is excess demand. For the excess supply, If the price is set too high, excess supply will be created within the economy and there will be allocative inefficiency. This is a sample of the excess supply. At price P1, the quantity of goods that the producers wish to supply is indicated by Q2. At P1, however, the quantity of the consumers want to consume is at Q1, a quantity much less than Q2. Because Q2 is greater than Q1, too much is being produced and too little is being consumed. The suppliers are trying to produce more goods, which they hope to sell to increase profits, but those consuming of goods will find the product less attractive and purchase less because the price is too high. For excess demand is created when price is set below the equilibrium price. Because the price is so low, too many consumers want the good while producers are not making enough of it. And this is a sample curve of excess demand. In this situation, at price P1, the quantity of goods demanded by the consumers at this price is Q2. Conversely, the quantity of goods that producers are willing to produce at this price is Q1. Thus, there are too few goods being produced to satisfy the want or demand of the consumers. However, as consumers have to compete with one another to buy the goods at this price, the demand will push the price up, making suppliers want to supply more and bringing the price closer to its equilibrium. The next issue is about shifts and movement. For economics, the movements and shifts in relation to the supply and demand curves represent very different market phenomena. The first one is movement, and the second one is shifts. For the movements, a movement refers to a change along a curve. On the demand curve, a movement denotes a change in both price and quantity demanded from one point to another on the curve. The movement implies that the demand relationship remains consistent. Therefore, a movement along the demand curve will occur when the price of the good changes, and the quantity demanded changes in accordance to the original demand relationship. In other words, a movement occurs when a change in the quantity demanded is caused only by a change in price and vice versa. And here is the sample of movement along the demand curve. The bar on the left side is the price and the bar below is the quantity. And this is a sample of movement along the supply curve. This is the comparison between the movement along the demand curve and the movement along the supply curve. Can you see the difference? Like a movement along the demand curve, a movement along the supply curve means that the supply relationship remains consistent. Therefore, a movement along the supply curve will occur when the price of the good changes and the quantity supplied changes, it according to the original supply relationship. In other words, a movement occurs when a change in quantity supplied is caused only by a change in price and vice versa. For the chips, a shift is a demand or supply curve occurs when a good's quantity demanded or supplied changes, even though price remains the same. For instance, if the price for a bottle of beer was $2 and the quantity of beer demanded increased from Q1 to Q2, then there would be a shift on the demand for beer. Shifts in the demand curve imply that the original demand relationship has changed, meaning that quantity demand is affected by a factor other than a price. A shift in the demand relationship would occur if, for instance, beer suddenly becomes the only type of alcohol available for consumption. And this is a sample curve of shift in demand for beer. And this is a sample of shift in supply for beer. Conversely, if the price for a bottle of beer was $2 and the quantity supplied decreased from Q1 to Q2, then there would be a shift in the supply of beer. Like the shift in the demand curve, a shift in the supply curve implies that the original supply curve has changed, meaning that the quantity supplied is affected by a factor other than price. A shift in the supply curve would occur if, for instance, a natural disaster caused a mass shortage of hops. Beer manufacturers would be forced to supply less beer for the same price. The good news is that's it for today. How is our lessons? Let's see next week.